Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to NGLCC's latest installment of Webinar Wednesdays. I'm Senior VP Jonathan Lovitz, and thrilled to welcome you here today for another exciting installment of our terrific program to connect business owners with important information and elements of discovery to help grow your business. Thanks for joining us again today. A few housekeeping reminders that we are currently live on Facebook Live. Hello to everyone joining us around the country, and also recording this presentation for post webinar updates on our NGLCC blog and on our webinars homepage. To learn more about the NGLCC webinars, please go to nglcc.org/webinars. Throughout today's presentation, you can use the Q&A buttons to share questions with our outstanding speaker, who will take them at the end of the program, as well as use the chat function to share ideas with one another and with your moderators. Speaking of, it's my pleasure to turn it over to my colleague, the brilliant fellow SVP at the NGLCC, Sabrina Kent.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Good afternoon to everybody here on Zoom and tuning in via Facebook Live. We're so excited to have another installment of the NGLCC Webinar Wednesdays program today with the lovely Genesis Fisher from Fisher Law Practice. Before I turn it over to Genesis, we would be nothing without an introduction. So to give you some background, Genesis is a mediator and adjunct law professor. After years of fighting for her clients in court, she left it all behind to focus on resolving conflict and building connections. Today, Fisher Law Practice helps businesses create healthier workplaces by addressing and preventing office tension, which is exactly why we're here today. So Genesis, thanks so much for being here, and take it away.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today. And before I get started, I just want to thank NGLCC. You guys are a rock in our community. And if you don't mind, I just want to start with my NGLCC origin story. I'm an attorney, and I started my mediation firm a few years ago. And I was going to a lot of bar association events in New York City, and they were fine. I just wasn't really feeling connected to folks. And then I went to an Out Professionals event, and Mary Blanchett, shout out to her, introduced me to NGLCC. And then the first event I went to, I was like, this is my community, this is home. So thank you guys for providing a home base. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for being so active and just giving, showing everyone an opportunity model, especially for recovering lawyers, and we have many in the network, so thank you. The screen is yours to take over, and we appreciate you so much, Genesis. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. Great. So yeah, so we'll just get started then. So essentially, what we're going to talk about today are a few things you need to know about understanding and managing conflict. You'll see me look back and forth because the camera on my computer is finicky, so I turned on the camera on my big screen. So that's why I'll be toggling back and forth, but I'll try to speak to you guys as if you're right here. But yeah, we'll talk about 5 things today to help you, 3 or 4 things to help you understand conflict, and a couple of tips to help you manage conflict. So we want to live in and work in peaceful environments. That's what we want, and better communication will help us do that. And what we're going to do today is to talk about a framework for how you conceptualize conflict to kind of shift that a little bit, and then also a couple of tools that we can use to check in with ourselves to be our best selves, and then also a tool that we can use for active listening to make sure that we're understanding the other person as well as we can. So we're going to talk about emotions today. We're going to talk about positions versus interests, which is a way that conflict resolvers and actually other people talk about how you define conflict. We're going to talk about how you check in with yourself, setting boundaries, and then that active listening tool reflecting back. So before we get started, well, actually, now that we're starting, we're talking about emotions. And so I'll say this, when I ask people, what are some emotions that come up for you? When you think about conflict, what kind of emotions are the first ones that come to mind? And I'll tell you what people share. So people say anger, sadness, frustration, sometimes regret, hurt. So these are the ones that are the top ones that people talk about. And anger is probably the one that people bring up 5 times out of 10. And then some of that, like the hurt and regret, some of those other emotions. But what I have listed here are a lot of other emotions that can come up in a conflict. And what I want us to think about is to think about, when there is tension, to think about it expansively, right? And so tension isn't always something that we use that we're figuring out ways to tamp down. Tension is also a reflection of information that can be shared. And that information could be the state of mind of the person that we're talking to. It could also be literal information and facts that need to be shared. And sometimes a disconnect between how people are understanding something and how you're understanding something. So why do I have all these emotions here? I want you to think about the emotions that I have listed here as emotions that actually might be the backbone for why someone might actually start a conflict. Okay, so you can imagine why, if someone is exhausted, that might lead to the beginning of an argument. I think you can probably also see how if someone is feeling insecure or anxious, how that might trigger the beginning of an argument. Also, if someone's feeling lonely, sometimes you'll see that even now, even with the disconnect, even though some of us are working at home and not having as much personal contact with our colleagues as we did before, in some ways it's actually exacerbated some of the loneliness we sometimes feel in the office space. And so sometimes tension can come from misunderstandings and from that loneliness and that kind of like subconscious need to connect. But I also want to lead you to some of the more positive emotions that can come out of or start conflict. So one of them I have in here on the left hand toward the bottom, I have proud and powerful. And so you might think, how do these relate to conflict, feeling proud and powerful? Well, you can be actually in an argument with someone talking about something that you learned or a topic that's really important to you. You could be maybe defending a group that's really important to you, or explain to someone about your experience in a way that's very personal. And you can be proud to share that story. And it can feel powerful to be able to advocate for people that you're talking about in your discussion. Similarly, in the middle, I wrote protective. Protective is another emotion that we don't often think about when we think about conflict. And then on the right hand side, I also have righteous. And so the reason why I bring these up is to say that not all of the emotions that are come up with that trigger or explored in a conflict are bad. Some of them can be very good. And it's important for you to think about this when you're thinking about how do you contextualize the conflict that you're in or the tension that you see, in terms of not just tamping it down and making it go away, but what is there here that I can explore? Because if someone is feeling proud and powerful and protective and righteous, then the response of trying to exit the conflict as soon as possible might feel like you're taking something away from them, right? It might feel like you're trying to take away those good feelings and the advocacy that they may feel like they're doing in this particular argument. And so, when you're speaking to someone, really try to get a sense of, why is this so important to them? Why is this discussion so important to them? Not just what they want to get out of it, but why do we think this discussion itself is so important to them? So this is a biggie: positions versus interests. So a position is what the person says they want. Okay, so it can be a demand, a request, or even a threat. So I have an example here. Your sister can't stay with us if she won't respect our rules, right? That's a position. She can't stay with us if she won't respect our rules. The interests are the needs that motivate someone. That's what's under the surface. So what people are protecting and what they're seeking, what's in their heart and their values. And so you can see from the picture that I have on the right, the iceberg. And the iceberg is a classic example for conflict resolvers in order to kind of explain what conflict looks like. So when people tell you what they want, or they have their threat or their position, that is the top part of the iceberg, right? But we know that 90% of the iceberg is under the surface, just like with conflict. So whenever when people say, I demand this or I want this, that's only a part of the story. There's a lot of the story that's underneath the surface. And if you speak to that, you'll be able to find more creative solutions rather than just speaking to the position. And so I also write, each person may have many different interests. Some of them are contradictory, and some of them not fully recognized by the person themselves. And so what I mean by that is that this is what we do in mediation. People come in with positions, and through the mediation process, we help them communicate with each other and explore that interest side to be able to actually articulate what their needs are. Because if people aren't able to articulate their needs, then you won't be able to create solutions that fit those needs, right? So what does that mean in the workplace? It means that, a person's position might be, I should be respected more in the workplace. I feel like I'm not being respected. That might be their position, respect me more, which is a really amorphous word. But what are their underlying needs here? Their underlying needs might be feeling included. Their underlying needs might be recognition. Their underlying needs might be a sense of community, or a clear path up in the organization, right? So the position is respect, but the underlying needs are what you actually have to address in order to kind of quell that unrest that's under the surface. Okay, so one of the most important things that you're listening for, right? Because communication and conflict resolution is 90% listening. So one of the things you're listening for is what seems to be the most important thing for this person, right? Not just what are they telling me, but what seems to be the most important thing. So going back to that example of your sister can't stay with us if she won't respect our rules, right? That's a position. And so underlying that might be this amorphous thing of this interest or need of respect, right? It could also be, it's possible that maybe some of these rules are around safety. So maybe there are some safety concerns. Maybe there's curfews that the sister isn't dealing with or acknowledging, or maybe there are other rules in the household that have to deal with safety that the sister isn't really respecting. It could also be, I won't get into this. This example is a real example, but I won't get into the reputation part of it because we don't have time today. But it could also be issues of privacy too. So the position could be, your sister can't stay with us if she won't respect our rules. But when you get under the surface, it could be that, you know what, things are really tough right now, and I kind of just want the intimacy and privacy of our family, and not to kind of open it up, right? And so that's where this dialogue comes in, expanding what's underneath that surface of the iceberg, so that you can actually direct the conversation in a forward path. So before I move forward, I just want to open it up to see if there are any questions about emotions or this idea of positions versus interests.
And a reminder to everyone that you can use the Q&A buttons as well as the chat function, or raise your hand as well. If there's not questions now, we'll come back around with about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the presentation.
Great. Mediators are great with silence, so I'm going to give it another 10 seconds.
Quite the questions coming in through the group. Just kidding. It looks like you have done an excellent job so far, and there's no question.
I mean, I do my best. Okay.
No surprise.
I'm priming you though, because you actually do have to participate in a minute. So what I want to do is explore what are positions versus interests with an actual example. Okay. And I don't know if everyone has the same access, what their viewing situation is. So I'm actually going to read this. So pardon me for reading it. So this is an example. This guy's name is Paul. Paul, I live in a great neighborhood. People are nice to each other, and there are a lot of families. My wife and kids love it. But my new neighbor has created chaos. He rides his loud motorcycle at all hours, waking us up and triggering our dog. He drives so fast. Apparently, he doesn't care at all about all the kids out there playing. I can't stand it anymore. I made a complaint to my neighborhood safety group. If they do nothing, I'm going to the city council or the police. So just put in the chat, what do you think Paul's positions are? right? So his interests are his underlying needs, but his positions are the things that he's demanding. So what are Paul's positions?
While folks are putting their answers in, we did have one question that came through after, based on the last slide, saying, what if a person just won't talk? How can you get them to open up?
Sure. So we're gonna talk about reflecting back, uh, probably in maybe like 3 or 4 slides, and it's a really great tool to get people to share. Sometimes people don't open up because they're afraid that they won't be heard or afraid for various other reasons. So reflecting back is a great tool that enables you to essentially repeat back what they're saying to make sure that you're fully present and that they know that you're listening. And we'll talk more about the reasoning and theory behind it, but it's a great tool.
So we have somebody saying position is he doesn't like his neighbor's habits.
Yeah. So his position might be, I don't want him to ride around on his motorcycle.
And
Okay.
also saying that he doesn't like his neighbor's habits. His interest is to protect his dog and his kids.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Yeah, so I would say, so let's explore the positions and then we'll move to the interest. So for positions, yeah, I would say that one of Paul's positions is that maybe this neighbor needs to stop riding his motorcycle, okay? Or maybe his position might be that his neighbor needs to respect the rules of the neighborhood, okay? That might be something that Paul might demand. Um, so then let's move to Paul's interests. So what do we think his underlying interests are? What are the things that are the values, his deep concerns? Lexi did put in there protecting his family and his dog and kids, certainly. I see here too, concerned for the safety and consideration of the neighborhood. Yes, that's certainly an interest. Safety would be an interest of his, for sure. Um, Conformity, great one. I think that's true as well. It seems just from the information that we have here that Paul is deeply rooted in how he sees his neighborhood, right? And so this new neighbor comes in and it feels like a disruption to how he sees his neighborhood, right? And so one of his interests that he probably wouldn't say, but would be like, he probably might couch it in terms of like neighborhood values or something like that. But underlying that might be this idea of we all do things the same way, we have the same values and conformity. Are there any other interests that we think that Paul might have?
Somebody's saying conformity.
Yeah, I was just talking about that. I mean, I certainly think that he has this sense that the neighborhood should be a particular way, and a particular way that it has always been. I'll add another one. So in law school, we do hypotheticals all the time. And so we always have things like this, and we do them in conflict resolution too. So I want you to take a look at the last part here. So Paul said, I made a complaint to my neighborhood safety group. If they do nothing, I'm going to the city council or the police. So this is a little tricky, but Paul did not say in the statement that he ever talked to that neighbor who's riding his motorcycle, right? It sounds like he went around that neighbor. And so I would also argue that one of his interests that he doesn't like personal conflict, interpersonal conflict. Okay, he'll go to the neighborhood, he'll go to the police, he'll go to the city council, but he won't talk to that particular person. So there's something there that probably needs to be discussed. And I think that going back to one of the questions about what do you do with someone who won't speak up or share, there are certain, there is a certain type of folks who won't speak to someone directly, but will go around them. And we often see that in the workplace too. And sometimes people feel more powerful going around someone, or they feel shyer about what they think of as confrontation by essentially sharing what their needs are with someone directly. Okay, so this is a breakdown of positions versus interests. So again, when you're thinking about when someone's speaking to you, or you're in a conflict, or you're reviewing a conflict, witnessing conflict, think about what are they demanding, what are their positions, and then what are their interests, okay? Because if you think about what are their positions in this scenario, then you're limited to whether or not this neighbor can ride his bike and how he respects the rules, the current rules of the community. Those are very limited options in terms of like finding solutions. But if we talk generally about safety, about loving the neighborhood, and about some other things, then it actually opens up the discussion more about what are possibilities for how we can all live together in a safe way. So what happens when you feel like you're being pulled into a conflict? And this webinar is kind of more focused on workplace, but it's certainly possible, in any situation. So tip number one is to check in with yourself. So you want to think, where is my headspace? Do I have the patience for this conversation? Is this triggering for me? How and why? Do I already have a set of expectations? What assumptions have I made? And am I already certain about how this will end? So the reason why you're checking in with yourself is because to do the best in conflict, it's better to be at your best self too, right? It's better to be at your most patient. It's better to be in a space where you can be fully present. It's better to be at your best self. And we'll talk about setting boundaries in a few moments, but you want to set yourself in whatever the discussion is up for success. And that's the best way to do it, is check with yourself. So do you have the patience for this conversation? If you don't have the patience for it, then maybe this isn't the best time, right? I'm not saying put something off for like 2 years, but I'm saying if you're feeling harried and you're running around and you really don't have the space for it, then sometimes engaging in something at that time can do more bad than good. Is this triggering for me? How and why? That's really helpful to think about, because sometimes we bring in history into a conversation that history is, let me put it this way. There was this professor in college who always said you can't erase the weight of history from any of your decisions. And that's true. Okay, history is a part of everything that we do. However, when we're talking about dealing with conflict and having these conversations, if something is triggering for you, think about how and why. And are there particular ways to have this conversation that would kind of ease some of that internal tension for you? So if you're having a conversation, let's say you're having a conversation at work with a supervisor, and you're already upset because you had a conversation with the director an hour ago, explaining about the need to postpone this project, and the director wants to go forward, and the supervisor's kind of pushing you in a different way. It might be, again, who knows, but it might be helpful to say, like, can we have this conversation like an hour or two, right? So that you don't necessarily have that same like triggering thing that's impacting this conversation. It's also true about our own personal needs. Sometimes, issues of identity and other things can come up in a conversation, and sometimes we need to set better boundaries or parameters around these conversations if we need to have them. And then, do I already have a set of expectations? So what assumptions have I made, and am I already certain how this will end? This is really important, just check in with yourself, because a lot of times when we start an argument or a conflict, or when we're pulled into it, or if it happens organically, we have a sense in the beginning about exactly where this will end. And sometimes we kind of lead it in that direction. So we think, we've had this discussion 15 times. It's going to end the same way. It always ends the same way. So if you really think that way moving into it, then you'll start to steer it. And the idea with mediators and conflict resolution is that you have to be open to where this could lead. And already having an expectation about where it will end can be a reflection of experience. It can also be a reflection of frustration, and it can also be, you can also feel resigned. But I want you to think about, each day you have new skills, and things actually might turn out differently. And I'll tell you, as a mediator, it's pretty common that I start a mediation session, and 10 or 15 minutes into it, I'm like, oh man, I know exactly how this is going to end. This person's going to do this, this person's going to do this, and then they're going to ask for X, Y, and Z, right? Or maybe that's how I think it should end. And I have to tell you, in all the years I've been doing this, it never ends that way, right? It never does. So I have to recognize myself, recognize that I have these thoughts that I think it's going to end that way. Ask myself why. It's usually because I think that I probably know about, better than them, even though I've only known for 20 minutes. And then recognize that, okay, that's me trying to control the conversation, and then let it go away, and then just be present for them and see what they develop. Okay, so check in with yourself first. So the second one is to set clear boundaries. And this kind of leads into the one that we were just talking about. But what are your needs? Let them know. So, I want to hear you out, but it's hard to listen to you using that language or that tone. Or it's important to me to talk through this, but I'm emotionally exhausted right now. Could we talk in an hour or after tomorrow's meeting? This in some of the workplace coaching that I do, this actually comes up a lot. The second one does. It often happens. I don't say often, but people have different communication styles and different conflict styles. And some people are really aggressive in their conflict style. And when you're talking to someone who's not aggressive, there can be a disconnect there. And that can be very difficult, especially for the person it can be frustrating for the person who has an aggressive style because they feel like they're not getting through. And it can be frustrating for the person who doesn't have an aggressive style because, they feel like they're just being yelled at and being told what to do. And so it's helpful just to set boundaries about what you need from the conversation in order to keep it productive. And so if someone's cursing at you or using a tone that you don't appreciate, let them know. If this is not a great time, let them know. And I'll say too, part of it is also the awareness of setting your own boundaries. So, I know that in the work that I do, I schedule mediations and coaching at particular times and particular days of the week so that I have a chance to refresh and be my best for these conversations. So if you have a conversation coming up with a colleague or a supervisor or your staff or whatever, and you know that it's going to be difficult, set time around that discussion. So set time leading up to it so that you can check in with yourself and compose yourself, and set time afterwards so that you can reflect on what was shared and kind of come down from it so that you can be your best self for the next day. Okay, so the next tip we're going to talk about is reflecting back. And this is that skill that I was talking about before it's like mediator bread and butter. It's the basis for almost all conflict resolution that I've experienced. And so reflecting back is probably the most important tool for active listening. It helps people feel heard, it encourages dialogue, and it slows down the pace of interaction. So what is reflecting back? Reflecting back is exactly what it is. You see that guy in the mirror, right? Someone says something to you, and you're like a mirror, and you just say it right back to them, okay? So someone says, man, I had a really hard time parking my car today. And you say, sounds like you had a hard time parking your car today, right? And it seems, I'm going to put a point here, it seems awkward, it seems antisocial, and it seems non-conversational, right? It seems awkward because you're just repeating back what they're saying, and it doesn't feel conversational at all, right? It feels like you don't really care about the next step in the conversation, and that you're just there to repeat things back to them. And it also feels antisocial because we all feel like when we're having a conversation that that it is a shared experience that's leading towards discovering new information or sharing things, right? That it's like a back and forth, a give and take. And some people feel like reflecting back takes away that give and take that feels natural in a conversation. So, but I'll tell you that it works. And so reflecting back is important for multiple reasons. So reflecting back is an important tool for everyone who is in that room where the reflecting is occurring. So if I am the one who is speaking to someone who is reflecting back to me, when that person reflects back to me, I know that that person is 100% present with me and not thinking about dinner and not thinking about childcare issues, not thinking about visiting friends, not thinking about margaritas, right? Because if you're thinking about that stuff, you actually won't be able to reflect back what you heard. Okay, so reflecting back is a way to stay present. So when I'm speaking and someone is reflecting something back to me, I know that they're present with me. I also have a chance to agree with or correct what they said back to me. And so oftentimes what you'll see is that someone will say something, you never do this, you never do that. You know, I'm going to take you off this project, you can't even, whatever. And so when you reflect back to them, you say like, so it sounds like you think that I never do this, and I never do that, and that you want to take me off this project. And it seems difficult to have to reflect something like that back, but oftentimes people will correct themselves when they hear it said back to them. So when you hear them say back to you that, so I never do this, I never do this, I never do that. Well, actually, okay, well, that's true. You actually did, you were really great on X, Y, and Z project, right? So that's true. So it's right that you don't actually never help out. You do help out with something. And so it gives people a chance to actually like absorb what they're putting out there and make sure that it actually syncs with what they want to put out there. So for the listener, the one who is reflecting back, again, it's keeping you present. It also keeps you hyper focused on kind of what they're saying, and so you're not acting reflexively. And then it also slows down the conversation. So the very process of reflecting back essentially almost doubles the time period in this conversation. So conflict is like bam, 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 back and forth. You said this, you're doing this, you're doing this. Reflecting back, pardon the siren. Reflecting back is an opportunity to slow things down. And so if I say something and someone reflects it back to me, then that's double time for that same statement. And we're kind of slowing these things down. And slowing things down is often an opportunity for more of those interests to come out. And then lastly, reflecting back is a great tool for everyone else who's in that room. So we all have our own approaches to conflict and baggage with conflict, right? And certain discussions have actually have happened more than once. And we also certainly sometimes get into grooves in how we communicate with each other. And so when Alex says something to Martha, and Alex reflects back Martha, then me as a bystander, I'm hearing it differently in the reflecting back, because I have baggage with the speaker, and so when they say something, I hear it, but when it's reflected back, I'm able to absorb it in a different way because I don't have the same type of baggage the person is reflecting back. Okay, so for all of these reasons, it's a really valuable tool, and it's deceptively easy. It's actually really easy. The dis-ease is internally when you feel like it feels awkward, antisocial, and non-conversational. But if you get over that, it's a great tool. It's a great tool. And so how do you reflect back? You repeat back exactly what was said, as I said. Try not to summarize or judge. So when you reflect back, try to use a neutral tone and try not to just summarize what they said. I mean, if they talk for like 5 minutes, you gotta summarize that, right? You can't reflect back all that. That's just crazy. But the reason why I say to try to refrain from summarizing is that sometimes when we summarize, we pull out the things that are most important to us, but may not be the things that are most important to them. Okay. So I have one more example for you guys before I take volunteers and we actually kind of practice this a little bit. So I did a training a couple of years ago, and one of the employees who was in the training, and this was about conflict resolution skills, and we were about to do an exercise on reflecting back. And so we broke up into groups, and they were sharing what they did for the weekend. That's a standard prompt that I use. I'm tell each other what you did for the weekend, talk for 3 minutes, reflect back, and then switch partners. So we did a debrief at the end, and I was asking people how they did. And this guy in the front, he raised his hand. He's like, I kind of did my own thing. I didn't reflect back, and I think that I learned more from that conversation than reflecting back, right? And so I said, well, how did that conversation start? And he said, she said that she went to the gym and went to like a Zumba class with some friends, and that she had a lot of fun in the class. And I said, okay, so you reflected that back to her. And he's like, yeah. I was like, oh, you went to a class at the gym. Like, tell me about this gym, right? And so she told him about the gym, and he's like, oh, I like that area, and then sharing more, and then talking about the class and talking about Zumba, and it became conversational. And so he said at the end of the 3 minutes, we had talked about the gyms we liked, we talked about the classes we liked, we talked about all these things. So I asked him, like, what did she actually want to talk about in this conversation? Because we don't know, right? And that's the thing. Like, her saying, okay, I went to the gym and I went to a Zumba class with friends and it was great, might have just been like the preamble to an entirely other thread of what she wanted to talk about for her weekend. We don't know that that's what she wanted to focus the entire discussion on, right? And so when you reflect back something to them, you're taking your agenda out of the conversation and you're having them actually create the path forward in the conversation and trajectory, right? And that's active listening. And that's when you're going to get great information, and that's how you're going to kind of break through some of these impasses. So hopefully we'll have a chance to do an exercise, but before we get into that, I just want to open up for questions generally about what reflecting back is before we move on.
And a reminder to anyone that if you have questions, use the chat box, the Q&A feature, or use the raise hands feature. We can call on you and turn on your camera as well. And while we're waiting for a question or two to come in, we're also going to be seeking, I think, a volunteer or two. Is that right, Genesis?
Yeah, it would be great to have 2 volunteers if they could, if they would feel comfortable reflecting back for each other for 2 minutes each.
We had a raised hand, I think, from Taylor, perhaps. Taylor, was that you? Yep, excellent. Taylor, you have the microphone. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. So can you just, sorry, I was having trouble with my headset. Can you just verify the prompt one more time? I'm sorry. Or am I working with someone else?
Oh, not yet. Yeah, so I was actually just
See if we have any questions first. But yeah, Taylor.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I misunderstood. Okay. My active listening skills apparently need some work as well. So good thing I'm here. My apologies. I misunderstood the order.
No
Sorry.
worries. Well, hold tight, Taylor. We'll come right back to you when.
Okay, I'll mute myself.
For a volunteer, we'll be right back with you. But actually, Genesis, in the interest of time, let's jump right in with that, and then we'll take any more questions if they come in. But I think we're ready to go ahead.
Okay, so what I'll do is Taylor has volunteered. So what I'll actually do is I'll reflect back Taylor, and you'll see what it looks like in real time. So Taylor, if you don't mind, my prompt to you is to tell me what you did over the weekend. And let me say this. So sometimes when I give people this prompt, then they like it moves from like a conversation to feeling like they have to share everything at once. So even though you're reflecting back, it is conversational. So that means like, don't talk for like 3 minutes straight, because it's really hard for like a person to keep that in their mind. So just like a conversation, like, the kinds of pauses you would use in a conversation is helpful. So yeah, so Taylor, what did you do over the weekend?
Yeah, over the weekend, I had a pretty good time. I got to see some family for a fun, socially distanced 4th of July. So yeah, it was mostly just saw a little bit of family, did some chores around the house, stuff like that.
Great. So it sounds like you had a pretty good 4th of July. You got to see some family and spend some time with them, and that you had a good time, and you're actually able to do some chores that you were trying to get to.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Great. Okay, so that's essentially what reflecting back is. That's literally just like repeating back to Taylor exactly what she said. Reflecting back 2.0 is reflecting back and then asking an open-ended question at the end of it. Okay, that's reflecting back 2.0. But this is reflecting back 1.0, which is all we have time for today. So Taylor, would you actually feel comfortable reflecting back the statement that I made?
Sure. So, so it sounds like, unfortunately, we don't have time today to go into reflecting back 2.0, but what you did was you reflected back the first 1.0, as you called it. So basically just sort of sort of like summarizing what I had gone through and making sure you were engaged with what I was saying.
Oh my God, thank you. I was actually just going to give you that softball of what I did over the weekend. I was just like checking in with you. I didn't
Oh,
realize you were going to reflect back.
oh, I
That's
thought you were
amazing.
asking me to reflect back
No,
what
no,
you
that's
just.
amazing. Thank you. That's like the most active listening I mean, like you weren't even
I did
prompted.
it.
That's amazing. You
Oh,
were,
I'm sorry.
no
I
one said
misunderstood
that.
the prompt.
Exactly. Kudos to you. Thank you. Thank you so much again for that.
Thanks.
I feel validated, Taylor. So thank you. Thank you very much for that experience. Great. So that's super easy, but that's what reflecting back is. It's really easy. The bonus with reflecting back is that it takes the pressure off of you. Okay, so oftentimes when we're in these tense conversations, we feel the need to either say something that's going to decrease the tension or say something that we think is going to move us through this impasse. There's a lot of pressure we place on ourselves to find the right statement or question or whatever to get to the heart of the matter, to get through it. And reflecting back takes away all that pressure. It just keeps you in the moment to make sure that you're understanding the person correctly. And oftentimes what happens with this validation, this back and forth, this reflecting back, is that that person will then create movement. It puts the onus on that person to kind of create some movement. Okay, and that's helpful, especially going back to, I think it was Ava's question or someone's question earlier about, what do you do if someone's really not engaging? Okay, so then you're reflecting back what they say, and then being okay with silence. And I'll say that reflecting back has 3 different levels. So there's reflecting back the facts, so reflecting back exactly what Taylor said about the weekend. There's reflecting back emotions that we talked about, which is that, it seems like, I'm looking at you, Taylor, because you're on my screen, so that's why I keep looking in this direction. But reflecting back emotions would be like, it seems like it was, you were really excited about the weekend, that you had some good times, right? So that might be an emotion that I might name based on her affect and how she did it. And then, not necessarily for Taylor, but you can also reflect back nonverbals, okay? And this is like reflecting back 3.0, so this is pretty advanced. But you might reflect back, Tabitha, I see that you haven't, been really engaged you haven't shared a lot in this conversation, and that you're kind of sitting back with your arms crossed. Is there anything that you want to share? That's reflecting on the behavior or nonverbals that you see. So there's different types of reflecting back that you can do, but the first one, the 1.0, will get you really far, and it's something that you can practice anytime. It's crazy. It also becomes part of you. And so I actually realized that I was playing with my friend's kid over the weekend, and she was like making up these games where we were pretending to be lions and stuff like that. And I found myself reflecting back the rules of the game to make sure that I got the rules of the game right. And I'm like, okay, so I'm protecting you and the lion cubs from this hyena that's coming through the door. Yes, right? And so it seems silly, but like it becomes natural, like a part of you. And also I got to make sure I got those rules right, because like 5-year-olds, they don't like when you don't do things right. So yeah, so that's reflecting back. So I know that we have some time for questions.
We have a really good one in the chat, actually, if you're ready for it, Genesis.
Yes.
Awesome. So Erica asks, if a conversation, oh, and great job, Taylor. Thank you. Great listener. If a conversation is heated, how do you initiate reflecting back in a positive way? What is the best way to amplify and return that, proof of active listening, but also be ready to engage with your own own view and own talking points?
Sure. And so part of reflecting back is kind of putting yourself on hold for a second. And you want to be really clear about what you're doing. So the best way to engage in any of this stuff is to be really transparent. So if you're having a big argument back and forth and it's really heated, you can say like, you know what, I just want to take a step back. I want to make sure I'm hearing you right here, okay? And so I'm just going to repeat back to you what you said to me. I just want to make sure I have it right. okay? And so you're transparent about exactly what you're doing. You're not, having someone yell at you and then saying that, da, 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 without telling them what you're doing, because then it can feel like you're being sarcastic or that you are trying to, I don't know, control the dialogue in some way. So as I said, just be really transparent about what you're doing and why. You're doing it because you actually want to make sure you have it right and that you're actually understanding what they need.
That's excellent, Genesis. Sort of in that lane, somebody direct messaged me a question saying, so what if I've tried these tactics and I've tried to be as clear as possible when articulating, how I feel in a situation of conflict and what I think might be the course of action, and that person seems to not be able to hear what I'm saying? How, even though I'm trying over and over to articulate myself as clearly as possible, how do I approach that? How do I try to help this person understand so we can reach a point of resolution? Great question.
Sure. It is a great question. And going back to what I said before, there are all of these emotions on both sides of the conflict, and all of these histories on both sides of the conflict, all these triggers on both sides of the conflict. And it's also exacerbated by the fact that we learn in different ways, and there are different types of communication that feel like a home base for us, where things can actually be absorbed. So it's great that you're clear about what your needs are. And that's one half of the battle. So what you can do is you can ask them, if they're not understanding what you need, you can ask them for more information to kind of get a sense about what they're missing, what might be missing in the communication. You also might learn in that conversation how they need to hear this information, because sometimes how we prefer to give it may not be exactly how they need to hear it. So there are certainly some dialogues that are better. Sometimes I encourage you to write a letter to someone, or to have a mediator or a third party come in if they can't communicate back and forth. Sometimes taking a break is helpful. Sometimes conflicts start with, you get into these grooves where one person is always the person who starts it. And so you can say, you can schedule something and say, let's come back to this at 2 o'clock. And then you can be the one to start the conversation and engage. So there are a lot of different ways to deal with it, but there's, without knowing more, it's, I can't tell you exactly which way would be the most helpful, but people also have different approaches to conflict, and the best way to be effective is to communicate it in a way where they can understand it, to know your audience. So you have to know yourself well enough to know what you need and articulate that. And then the second step is trying to figure out how best look for information and try to speak to that.
Great advice. So a question we're getting in the Q&A box: how do you engage with someone that is explosive, then apologizes for what they say, and then continue the behavior?
You set boundaries. So if they apologize, then develop a plan. If it's something, it sounds like this is a pattern. So if someone is explosive, they apologize and they do it again, it sounds like you're asking about something that's a pattern. So a way to deal with the pattern would be to problem solve around the next time this may come up. And so if someone is explosive, then you say, listen, you're apologetic now, but this happens, this actually something that keeps happening. So can we both agree that when you explode next time, I'm going to walk out of the room and we'll talk about it later, and that we're not going to engage, right? And so that's a great time to set boundaries and set expectations for what it's going to look like in the future.
Very, very good one. Thank you. Final call for any last questions for Genesis, our brilliant expert today. And anyone that didn't get a chance to ask one or gets one of those great moments later while you're self-reflecting, you can always reach out to us at webinars@nglcc.org, and we'll make sure that question gets answered for you. Genesis, while we're waiting for any final questions to come in, how can everyone get in touch with you if they'd like to learn more, engage your services, ask some questions, pick a fight with you?
Pick a fight? It's only Wednesday. And that fight better come with a frozen margarita.
Okay.
So, so this is how you can get in touch with us. A little bit about what we do. We do mediation, board retreats, coaching, and conflict resolution workshops. So we teach staff how to communicate better with each other. We have a couple offerings right now. The big one is the COVID Workplace Dialogue Series. But at the bottom is our email address. So info@fisherlawpractice.nyc for a consult. And if you mention NGLCC, you get a priority appointment. So you don't have to wait as long to talk to me if you mention NGLCC. Definitely better.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And we'll make sure all of this information, as well as other resources that you might have available on conflict resolution, are all in the Wrap Out blog. And I want to take just a second, first of all, to thank you again for a fantastic presentation, but also as we're going, transferring presentation modes here real quick, saying, you've been a big part of this Legal Industry Council, and I want to give a shout out to you and other members of the legal profession who work in this, and tell everyone who's watching, you've got a massive network of LGBTBEs in the legal profession, like Genesis, who have decades of experience, who have a depth of knowledge, and often have some of the best availability out there compared to some of those large firms that you may want to go after. They are some of the most active members of local affiliate chambers, and very often make up the bulk of the requests we get from local chamber members saying, hey, I'd like to keep money in the community. I'd like to engage the services of someone who gets me and gets my family. So a shout out to folks out there, and sharing a slide that we share with our corporate partners and law firms all the time. It's more than just law. It's everything you need from documents and research and things that can help your business grow. Lawyers are the ultimate experts at the what I didn't know element of doing business. And they're just a great way to also help ensure supplier diversity is a part of your own personal life by engaging a minority LGBT diverse legal professional like the brilliant Genesis Fisher. So we want to say thank you again as we're coming up to the bottom of the hour. Sabrina, what do we have coming up?
Yeah, we've got an exciting program next week by another NGLCC-wire, Mitch Lipman from the Mitch Lipman Consulting Group. We're talking about Remote Leader 2.0, moving from maintenance to resilience, increased productivity and engagement. That's not just you as a leader, but how to support virtual teams and virtual internships in this wonderful world that we now live in. Make sure that you submit your webinar requests to nglcc.org/webinars. We'd love to feature you on an upcoming program. And any questions about the Webinar Wednesdays program can be directed to us at webinars@nglcc.org. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our lovely twice monthly Friday program, NGLCC LGBT Sip and Pitch Fridays. We're going to be together next week, July 17th. For another wonderful program. We've already got some wonderful businesses lined up to pitch and incredible corporate partners to join us for that. So be sure to tune in to Sip and Pitch. Take a look at our YouTube page for previous Webinar Wednesdays and previous Sip and Pitch programs. And Genesis, thank you so much for being here with us. I know I'm going to take a lot of these tips and tricks back in my own life, personally and professionally. I know everyone else will too. So thank you so much. Thank you for being a great partner to NGLCC. And thank you all for attending today. Have a great one.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Genesis. Everyone have a great day.